Tzaddik, Part 1. His life. Chaye Moharan. His birthplace, residence and travels. 1 Tishrei. 104. Rabbi Nachman was born in the town of Medzebos on Shabbat, the first day of Nisan, 5532, April 4th, 1772, and entered the covenant on Shabbat Hagadol, April 11th. He departed this life and ascended above in the year 5571, 1810, on the 18th day of the month of Tishrei, a Tuesday, the 4th day of the festival of Sukkot, October 16th. He died in Uman, the town he had chosen as his resting place for the life eternal. Thus he lived a total of 38 years, 6 months and 18 days. 105. From the day he was born until he became bar mitzvah and married, he lived the whole time in Midzebos. An account of his devotions has already been given elsewhere, although less than a drop in the ocean is known about it. Even as a young child he was already stirred with a fervent devotion to God's service. He was married in the region of Medvedevka to the daughter of the princely Rabbi Ephraim of blessed memory. Rabbi Ephraim, famous for his learning and fear of heaven, was a highly respected man from a renowned family. He was originally from Breslov, but eventually he moved to Osatin, one of a number of villages around the town of Medvedevka. He took responsibility for these villages. He had a very good name among all the famous tzaddikim, and they all used to come and stay in his house. His wife, the Rebbe's mother-in-law, was a woman of the greatest piety. Kobel Talman Tzadirais. Rabbi Nachman's marriage took place shortly after his bar mitzvah. On the very day of his wedding, as he left the chuppah at the end of the marriage ceremony, he was filled with tremendous longing and yearning for God. That same day he formed a friendship with Reb Shemen, the son of Reb Ber. From then on he lived in his father-in-law's house, and he worked on his devotions there in the villages around Medvedevka. He struggled and toiled with all his energy. From time to time he would travel to Medzebos and then return. Periodically he would talk to people about serving God, and he was able to kindle their enthusiasm and evoke in their hearts a strong passion for God. Several years passed. Rabbi Nachman continued with his devotions, fasting, meditating, and struggling without respite. He was faced with innumerable trials. All the while he still lived with his father-in-law. In this period, a few people already started following him, even though he was still only a young man of less than 20. However, he was extremely diligent and energetic in his devotions, which he had started when he was literally a child. 2 Tishri. 106. Reb Shimon told me that on the day of the Rebbe's wedding, immediately after he had covered the face of his bride according to the custom, he went and called a number of the young men and spoke with each one individually. With great subtlety he probed them to find out their true disposition. Eventually he called Reb Shimon and started talking to him in the same shrewd manner. He made out that he was interested in the vanities of this world. Reb Shimon stood there in amazement without answering him, because he was not interested in such things. The Rebbe said to him, "What do you mean? You're human, after all. Why don't you want all the things this world has to offer?" "I'm a simple person," replied Reb Shimon, "and my desire is for purity." "It would seem," the Rebbe said, "that a great acquaintance will develop between us." The Rebbe then told him that he had spoken with the other young men, and he had probed and tested them, and they were all very far from God. Their sins had corrupted them. The Rebbe immediately took Reb Shimon out into the meadows, and they spoke at length about serving God. They were filled with enthusiasm, and the Rebbe spoke with great fervor. "There is no purpose in this world except to abandon our worldly desires and serve God. This applies especially to me, seeing as it is my wedding day, and all my sins are forgiven. One should certainly examine myself very carefully." They carried on speaking like this until it was time for the marriage ceremony. How fortunate is the bridegroom who truly reflects on the purpose of life on the day of his wedding. From this time on, Reb Shimon became very close to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe spoke with him a great deal, and very persuasively, about how he should follow his own example and separate himself from the world completely so as to struggle and toil exclusively in the service of God. Reb Shimon said to him, "You will certainly become a famous tzaddik. My wish is to be your attendant at all times." This is what actually happened. See below number 534. Yet Reb Shimon was a man of outstanding holiness in his own right. I heard directly from the Rebbe quite a few years ago that Reb Shimon had already broken all his bad character traits completely. 107. Reb Shimon related that on one occasion after the Rebbe was already famous, he was traveling with him on the road near Osatin, the place where the Rebbe had struggled with his devotions when he was living in his father-in-law's house. They were traveling through the countryside when the Rebbe said in a voice filled with emotion, "How good it was for me here. With every single step I took, I felt the taste of the Garden of Eden." It was along these roads and paths that the Rebbe used to go and seclude himself in prayer and meditation. As they traveled along, the Rebbe said with great sadness and emotion, "Here it was good, very good. What do I need my present fame for?" On another occasion I was present when the Rebbe said that as a young man, when he used to pray and meditate in seclusion somewhere in the forest or the meadows, he would return with the feeling that the whole world was completely new. The world would seem entirely different from what it had been. It was not at all the same world as it had seemed to be before. 3 Tishri 5, 108. After this, there were developments that made it necessary for Rabbi Nachman to leave his father-in-law's household. His mother-in-law had died, and his father-in-law married again. His new wife was from Mochilov. The Rebbe himself was responsible for making the match. He traveled with Rabbi Ephraim to Mohilev and made the arrangements, this despite the fact that he was still only a youth. I seem to recall hearing that he was then about 18, about 1790. Even so, there were a few people who held him in respect because of his being the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and they could also see that in his own right he was a jewel of a person. Those who were astute realized even then that when he would be older, he would be an outstanding and original figure. The story goes that in Mochilev he was invited to stay in the house of a highly respected man who was one of the followers of the Rebbe's uncle, the saintly Rabbi Baruch. The Rebbe's host was a wealthy man who treated him with great honor and made a dinner for him, to which several of the leading followers of Rabbi Baruch were invited. Wine was served. Now, at that time, the Rebbe was still somewhat reserved, and he was not in the habit of teaching Torah publicly. But while they were sitting drinking wine, the Rebbe's enthusiasm was kindled. He began to speak, and he revealed the most wonderful ideas. The people present watched this spectacle in amazement and were very amazed and impressed. Then it was time for the wedding of the Rebbe's father-in-law, and they all went home. They all went home. Aifa! At about the same time, there arrived in the town the saintly Rabbi Dov of Breslov, a very well-known tzaddik, who was known by everyone as Reb Ber Breb Binim. People told Reb Ber what they had heard the Rebbe say at the dinner, and he was very amazed. He said that the Rebbe would become an outstanding and original figure. As yet, the Rebbe was still a member of his father-in-law's household, and people from the nearby localities began to become nosiji attached to him and visit him from time to time. The Rebbe knew how to inspire their hearts in the service of God. With his guidance, they drew closer to God and achieved the high levels of spirituality that they have today. Happy are they. 4 Tishrei. The Rebbe was still staying in his father-in-law's house, but not long afterwards, his mother-in-law started acting less than friendly towards him. The Rebbe had a room to himself in his father-in-law's house. It was a kind of attic, and there he would sit and meditate, pray, and practice his devotions. Periodically he would go out to meditate in the meadows or the forest. One day it happened that the Rebbe had gone on a journey. While he was away, his mother-in-law moved her bed into the room because she wanted it for herself. As soon as the Rebbe came back and found that she had taken his room from him, and for him the room had its own sanctity, he could no longer stay in his father-in-law's house. He left the village and went to the city and found himself quarters in Medvedevka. 609,000, and indeed tens of thousands of stories could be told about all the different details of these periods of the Rebbe's life in Medzaboz and Medvedevka, etc. He struggled and toiled at his devotions with tremendous energy, and he had to fight great battles every minute of every day before he was able to subdue and break all his traits and desires. However, it was not until the Rebbe came to Breslov that I myself became close to him. Thus, I only heard about this whole period intermittently and in no particular order, either from the Rebbe himself or from others who knew him then. I am therefore unable to give a systematic account of everything, and there is no option but to jump from subject to subject. Whatever I can remember I will certainly relate, but even what I did hear I have mostly forgotten. 7. 110J. Let me note down a few of the things that I heard from the Rebbe himself about his childhood and youth. He used to work very hard at his devotions. He wanted very much that God should show him a sign in order to strengthen his faith even more. He made repeated prayers and supplications, imploring God and pressing him to do this for him. The Rebbe related 3 miraculous incidents that took place in this period. Paisago Mesferacha. There was a particular area in the countryside where the Rebbe used to go in order to meditate and practice his devotions. Standing by the side of the road was a large crucifix, a common sight in rural areas. This was very distracting for the Rebbe, and he suffered greatly from seeing it standing there as he walked by meditating. He prayed to God to work a miracle and uproot the crucifix. And he shall decree a thing, and it shall be established. Cf. Job chapter 22, verse 28. Suddenly, the crucifix collapsed. Theo Fongzatul Gei. 5 Tishrei. The second incident concerned fish in a river, by the side of which the Rebbe used to walk. He wanted that the fish should swim up to his hand without a net, and so it came about. I am not sure about the third incident, but I think it was connected with his wanting to see the soul of a dead person. He prayed to God fervently about this, and it came about. Suddenly a certain dead person came to him while he was lying in the room he had in his father-in-law's house. The Rebbe was terrified because it was the first time he had seen a dead soul with his own eyes. Cf. Kokavi or Anshi Moharan No. 34, Section 2. For he was then only quite young, and besides, he said afterwards that this particular dead person had been an evildoer. That is why he was so terrified and panic-stricken. He started screaming and shouting, and the people in the house came running and tried to get into his room. But they could not enter because the Rebbe had previously closed the door from the inside. They had to find another way to get in. I do not remember if the Rebbe said they broke down the wall, or they entered from the roof in order to get into his room. Only afterwards did he calm down. He said it was because the dead person in question had been an evildoer that he was so terrified. Subsequently, he saw any number of dead souls, and he was never afraid, especially not in the latter period of his life, when he became the master of the field, and thousands upon thousands of souls came to him for their tikkun. For he made special efforts to work to make a tikkun for the souls of the dead and the naked souls that had so far not entered a body at all. Another story the Rebbe told is how once, when he was poor, he had nothing to eat for the evening. He was in the meadows as usual when he found some grits wrapped up in a scarf. He took them home to cook. From what he said, this was as precious to him as finding great spoil, Psalms 119-162. Because he had trusted in God, and God had provided him with his needs in the middle of a field. I heard him say that he knew the meaning of trust. Even if he were living in the middle of the open country, he would have trust that God would provide him with what he needed. He said that there was a level of trust that was even harder to attain, namely when the true tzaddik holds on to money without distributing it immediately. See below number 499,500. He also told me that he had received 300 gold coins as a marriage gift, and he lived off them until they were all used up. It was after this that the episode mentioned above took place, when he had no money. But at first, when he had the money, he did not think about the future at all. He carried on with his devotions and lived off the money. 6 Tishri, 8-111. The Rebbe spoke a lot about the ideas he had as a young man when he was occupied with his devotions. He told himself that he had no wish to be famous whatsoever, and he did not want to receive money from anyone. He had all kinds of ideas about how he would conceal what he was from people and what he would live from. At times he even thought he would go begging without anyone knowing who he was. Come to Bahas. 9-1-1-2. After this, he entered Medvedevka, and there several men from the surrounding villages got together and instituted a fund in order to give him 1 rindel a week. The Rebbe lived in Medvedevka relatively quietly and peacefully, and he began to attract a following. The numbers grew day by day, and people from the neighboring localities started coming to him. Before long, people were traveling distances of as much as 125 miles to visit him, because people from Dashev began to follow him during the time he lived there. Whoever drew close to him was filled with the fear of heaven. The Rebbe was able to turn many away from transgression and draw them to God with strong devotion. The Rebbe also encountered a certain amount of opposition in Medvedevka, but all his enemies fell before him. There were a few incidents with the rabbis there, but I am not clear about the details. 10-113. After this, the Rebbe traveled from Medvedevka to the Holy Land. On his return, he arranged the engagement, Malay of his daughter Adil, to Reb Yoske, the son of the well-known scholar, the saintly Rabbi Avraham Dov, rabbi of the community of Chmelnik. When the Rebbe came back from Israel, he spent a little more than a year living in Medvedevka. Immediately after arriving from Israel, he traveled to Liadi to visit the Hasidic leader and Torah luminary, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, 20, and he had lengthy discussions with him about the settlement in Israel. When the Rebbe had been there, they had given him a very warm reception and encouraged him to stay with him. On the subject of his journeys to and from Israel and his stay there are many stories to be told. The Rebbe was with the sainted Rav of Neskez 5 days before the latter passed away. The Rebbe went to him in a great hurry, because he was anxious to find him still alive. He arrived immediately prior to his death. A 21 Retikre, 7 Tishrei. It is impossible to describe the joy the Rav of Neskes derived from the Rebbe's visit and the love he showed for him. The Rav had been bedridden as a result of an extremely serious illness, as is well known. For half a year he had been confined to a darkened room because he was unable to suffer even the smallest patches of sunlight. He was unable to move, and he could not eat cooked dishes because he could not bear the smell. He drank soups that had to be strained repeatedly before he could eat them. No one was allowed to bring food into the house because of the smell. The Rav suffered very greatly. But when the Rebbe came to visit him, he literally brought him back to life. No sooner did the Rebbe's messenger arrive with the news that the Rebbe was on his way to visit him, than the rabbi was filled with joy, and he said that the tzaddikim. They discussed the angel Metatron and so on. Afterwards, the Rav gave explicit instructions that a dinner should be given in honor of the Rebbe in his own house, despite the fact that they were forbidden to bring in food because of his illness. But Tove breaks down barriers. Bereshit Rabbah 55-11. A great feast was prepared, and the Rebbe sat at the head of the table. The Rav got himself up and came into the living room, dressed in the traditional coat, woven with gold threads. He joined them at the table out of honor for the Rebbe, even though it was half a year since he had gotten out of bed, and sat at a table. Atal says, Al Bacha. It was the Rebbe's intention to spend Shabbat in the area. The Rav pressed him to eat in his house on Shabbat. The Rebbe was unwilling to do so, but the Rav urged him strongly, and it would appear that he did so. The Rav sent the Rebbe 10 gold coins for a redemption. The Rebbe saw that the Rav was obliged to distribute all his money, but this was impossible, and he understood that he would have to pass away. The Rebbe returned home prior to his death. Machacha datcha kashaka. 8 Tishrei. In Kremenchug, I spoke to a man whose father had been the attendant of the Rav of Neskes at the time of the Rebbe's visit. This man told me his father had said that the Rav treated the Rebbe with extraordinary honor, and despite his great weakness, he accompanied the Rebbe on his way when he left his house. When he came back to the house after leading his guest on his way, the Rav said, "If I had come into the world for nothing other than that Rabbi Nachman might step over my threshold, it would have been enough." After leaving the Rav of Neskes, the Rebbe visited the well-known Hasidic leader, Rav Zvi Arya of Alik. According to reports from followers of the Rebbe, the main thing the Rebbe was concerned with in these meetings was the subject of visions. The Rebbe did not agree with them about what they considered to be visions. He had had great arguments with the Rav of Neskes, who was well known for his visions. The Rebbe argued with him at length about this. I am not certain about the details, but the main point was that the Rebbe said that the form in which they saw what they experienced was not correct. The Rav of Neskes once sent a message to him, saying, "Tell him that before he came to the city I saw the angel Metatron," and he described what he had seen. As far as I recall, I heard that the Rav said he had literally seen Metatron. It would appear that on another occasion the Rav had claimed to the Rebbe, "I saw such and such," but the Rebbe would not accept this, and said, "This is not how Metatron appears. I have seen him in such and such a form, and this is the true way to see Metatron." Several other issues were raised in this connection, but I was not with the Rebbe when he spoke about them, and I heard nothing from him directly about them. All I heard was that he had visited the Rav of Neskes, and he told me a number of other stories he had heard then about the Rav's relationship with his teacher, the saintly Rav Michel of blessed memory, and how afterwards, on his return, he had visited the Rav of Alik. The Rav had already heard all the points raised in the Rebbe's arguments against the Rav of Neskes, because the dispute was a familiar subject in the region. When the Rebbe spent a Shabbat with the Rav of Alik, the Rav spoke at length at each of the Shabbat meals on the subject of visions. At each meal he gave Torah discourses, connecting everything with the question of visions. He wanted to show that he had real visions. The Rebbe disagreed with him completely, yet he said absolutely nothing. Prior to his visit he had prayed to God and thought out carefully how he should behave with the Rev. This was why he said nothing throughout the Shabbat. Marsh Baki. Afterwards, on Saturday night, the Rebbe went to his room in the Rav's house, and the Rav himself came in. He said, "You still don't believe me when I say I have had visions. I will give you decisive proof that I do." The Rav once again embarked on a Torah discourse in an attempt to prove to the Rebbe that he had visions. Only then did the Rebbe reply to him. Many have tried to explain the chariot, Ezekiel chapter 1, yet they never saw it in their life. Megillah 24b, 9, Tishri 11, 114. One day in the year 5560, 1800, the Rebbe saw that he had to go and live in Zlatopolia. Towards the end of the year, on the first day of Elul, His daughter Adil was married. The wedding took place in Shmelnik, and the Rebbe was present together with his entire family. His mother, the saintly Fega, of blessed memory, also attended, and at the time of the marriage ceremony she saw the Baal Shem Tov, for she was the possessor of Ruach HaKodesh in great insight, and was accepted as such by all the tzaddikim. In particular, her brothers, who were well-known tzaddikim, the saintly Rabbi Ephraim of Sudilkov and Rabbi Baruch of Medzabos, both considered her to be one of the prophetesses. In the same period, just after the wedding, the Rebbe's daughter Miriam became engaged to the son of Rabbi Leibush of Volochisk. On the Rebbe's return from Adil's wedding with his family, he journeyed immediately to Zlatopolia and entered the city without the knowledge of the members of the community. He had not hitherto consulted them at all. He simply rented accommodations and quite unexpectedly settled himself there. Despite this, the people of the community received him with great honor. Considerable numbers came to Zlatopolia to be with him for Rosh Hashanah. There were over 100 people. The Rebbe had made no preparations for them whatsoever, because he himself was like a visitor there, having arrived only recently. Nevertheless, the members of the community received all the visitors with great honor, and they pressed the Rebbe to pray in the main synagogue together with all his followers because there was plenty of space. He prayed there on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they gave him ultimate authority to decide about all the arrangements regarding who would lead the services and blow the shofar and so forth. He spent the 10 days of repentance there, and everything was perfectly peaceful. However, on Yom Kippur, the Nila service was conducted by a person who did not meet with the Rebbe's approval. In the middle of the service, the man became dumbstruck. He was simply unable to open his mouth. Eventually, he had to step down, to his great embarrassment, and someone else took his place. 10 Tishri. Afterwards, during the evening following the fast, the Rebbe spoke in a characteristically light-hearted way about the people who had led the services on Yom Kippur. He drew the comparison with the medal of Abraham, which had an old man and woman on one side, and a youth and a maiden on the other. Bereshit Rabbah 39-16. The opening prayers had been led by the father-in-law, and then Nila was led by his son-in-law. They had both prayed with their wives in mind, in order to gain their approval. The Rebbe then said that his own concern during the service had been with the problem of the landowner's efforts to take away the land agent's livelihood. If you only knew how the Satan sets himself in opposition to any holy endeavor and tries to put obstacles in the way and create turmoil. This man got up to pray, and I pushed him aside. The man became furious with the Rebbe and journeyed to the town of Shpola, where he denounced the Rebbe before Rabbi Leib the Shpola Zeta until the latter started his great conflict with the Rebbe. It was then that the great opposition to the Rebbe started, and it reached the point where almost the entire town was opposed to him. The opposition and the suffering that the Rebbe had to endure are indescribable. It was like sitting on thorns for him. After Sukkot, the Shpola Zeta came to Zlatopolia and spoke against the Rebbe, with no restraints whatsoever, until he stirred up tremendous opposition against the Rebbe. Prior to this, the Shpola Zeta had been very friendly to the Rebbe, and had shown him great deference and respect. However, now the Rebbe had entered within about 12 miles of his own territory, and had been roundly slandered by the man who had had to step down from the Yom Kippur prayers. This turned the Shpola Zeta into a formidable opponent. Eventually, the most unimaginable slanders were being fabricated against the Rebbe. But the Rebbe said he was obliged to stay there, because it was the will of heaven. For his task, there was to remedy the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 25 ff. The saintly Maggid of Terechovitza, who was one of the Rebbe's followers, asked him why he had not sent him to Zlatopolia beforehand, so that he could have spoken to the leading figures in the town, who would then have welcomed him with due respect. The Rebbe replied, "If I had wanted to wait, I would have entered Zlatopolia in a coach with magnificent pomp and dignity, but I could not wait. I was obliged by heaven to enter." 11 Tishri. An enormous amount could be written about all this, but it would consume volumes and volumes. During this time the Rebbe said, "Just as there are cities down below, so there are cities above." It was in this period that the Rebbe gave the lesson on "These are the journeys of the Jewish people," Numbers chapter 33 verse 1, in Likutei Moharan 262. There the Rebbe discusses the remedy for idol worship and the atonement for the words, "These are your gods, O Israel," Exodus chapter 32 verse 4, which were said of the golden calf. Here, there is only an allusion to the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. See below number 20. The Rebbe lived in Zlatopolia continuously for a period of 2 years, and he drew large numbers of people to God. It was there that the saintly Reb Yitzchak Isaac became a follower of the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave many awesome and elevated Torah lessons there. Arasutrav 12, 115. In the year 5562, 1802, in the month of Elul, the Rebbe arrived in Breslov. His first Shabbat there was that of Torah reading Kitetse. When the news of his coming reached nearby Nemirov, this was Reb Noson's own town, it seemed very surprising that he should have come to this area. But God in heaven took pity. His plan was for our own ultimate benefit, in order that a remnant should be left on earth so as to bring to pass as it is this day, and to sustain a great nation. Cf. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. For it was here in Breslov that the Rebbe's published works were completed, and here he composed the books that were concealed from the eyes of all mankind. Sefer Chanisraf, the burned book, see below number 66 FF 159, and Sefer Haganas, the hidden book. My own closeness to him began immediately after his arrival in Breslov. This is described at length elsewhere. The Rebbe said that if his only purpose in coming to Breslov had been to draw me near to him, this alone would have been sufficient. 12 Tishrei. Throughout his stay in Breslov, Rabbi Nachman had no problems with the inhabitants of the town. But everywhere else, the opposition grew and grew. The more people he drew to God, the stronger the opposition became. But the Rebbe continued with what he was doing, and every day, every hour, and every moment he rose to greater and greater heights, and to more and more exalted levels. Had it not been for the heavy burden of guilt in the world, which made the world unfit to draw from light such as this, and which caused the radiance to be concealed, the Rebbe's greatness would have been revealed to all, and he would have brought the entire world back to God. For his entire purpose and his constant concern every day of his life was to help people improve and bring them out of their darkness and into the light. The Rebbe said, so what if they drive me away from here too? No matter where I go, no matter where I step, I always put things right. On his way out of Zlatipolia, when the carriages had already come from Breslov to take him there, he said, here in Zlatipolia I suffered a double Gehenna. The sentence of the wicked in Gehenna is 12 months, Shabbat 33a, and I have suffered here for 2 years. He also said that until now he had been living alone, outside the camp of his true habitation. Cf. Leviticus chapter 13, verse 46. But now he was starting. I am not certain how his sentence continued, but he meant that now God was beginning to show goodness. I also heard that on one occasion, shortly after the Rebbe's arrival in Breslov, a cup of wine was poured for him for Kiddush, and it spilled. A second cup was poured, and he made the blessing over it. Afterwards he said, today we have planted the name of the Breslover Chassidim. This name will never disappear, because my followers will always be called after the city of Breslov. This is indeed what has happened, as everyone knows. Once he was in the house of his uncle, the saintly Rabbi Baruch, and he said, my uncle wanted to live in Breslov, but he never did. But I live in Breslov. Many other things that the Rebbe said on the subject of his living in Breslov have been preserved among his followers. The upshot of all of them is that there were awesome secrets and deeper meanings to his choice of Breslov as a place to live. 13 Tishri 13, 116. In the year 5563, 1803, the Rebbe made a wedding for his daughter, the saintly Sarah, who was married to Reb Yitzchak Isaac, the son of Rabbi Leib Dubrovner. The wedding took place in Medvedevka despite the fact that the Rebbe was already living in Breslov by then. The wedding was on Thursday evening, the first day of Nisan. After the ceremony they spoke about Mashiach, and the Rebbe mentioned elusively that it was fitting that he should be one of their offspring. See below number 274,612. On the following Shabbat, at the third meal, the Rebbe gave the very exalted lesson in Likutei Moharan I, 49. He set up a tent for the sun in their midst. Psalms 19-5. The lesson contains allusions to Nisan, Sarah, Isaac, a bride, and a wedding. The Rebbe said that he had not given this lesson for our sakes, but only on account of the decree of conscription that had recently been made against the Jews because of our many sins. There the Rebbe discusses the subjugation of the heathen nations. For I will make a kala, an end, of all the nations. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 11, 46-28. This is the concept of kala, bride, which is connected with the concept of echala, which consumes everything and makes an end of everything. You who are attached to God your Lord are all alive today. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 4. The Rebbe's words are very profound and exalted. After the Rebbe finished the lesson, He danced a great deal in honor of his daughter, the bride. Anyone who never saw him dance never saw good in his life. For although, with thanks to God, we were worthy of seeing a number of tzaddikim dancing before the bride, there was nothing to compare with the way the Rebbe danced. Anyone present would certainly have been moved to genuine repentance for all his sins. It is absolutely impossible to describe in writing the tremendous atmosphere of fervor and excitement among those who were standing there during the dancing. The Rebbe delivered a number of very elevated lessons on the subject of dancing and hand-clapping. The subject of dancing is also discussed in the above-mentioned lesson in Likutei Moharan 1:49. Normally, the Rebbe would dance only at very rare intervals. But in the course of the year in question, 1802-3, the Rebbe danced several times on Simchat Torah. On the Shabbat, during Chanukah, after he had delivered the lesson, I saw a golden candlestick, in Likutei Moharan, the first, 8, on Purim when the Rebbe was in Medvedevka, and afterwards at the wedding of his daughter. The Rebbe himself said, "This year I have danced a great deal." This was because it was in the course of this year that the news was heard about the decrees of conscription that they wanted to introduce. This was why the Rebbe danced several times, because through dancing it is possible to sweeten the harsh judgments and annul harsh decrees. 14 Tishri, 117. In the year 5565, 1804, the Rebbe made a wedding for his daughter Miriam in Volochisk. At the Vorspiel, which was on Shabbat, Torah reading Noach, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, the Rebbe danced practically the whole Shabbat. Never did we see the Rebbe dance like he danced that Shabbat. There is no way of describing or explaining the things that happened that day. The Rebbe prayed with us with just a scarf tied around the waist of his coat. Yet Tishifle afterwards, at the third meal, the Rebbe sat with us and told us to remember this third meal. He then related that on Rosh Hashanah of that year, he had been given an allowance of 1,000 gold coins over and above his basic needs. He ascended to a certain place. Now the Rebbe was a great lover of Torah, and in this place the most highly exalted words of Torah were being spoken. The Rebbe came there. A guard stood at the entrance and would not let him enter. He gave the guard his 1,000 gold coins so as to let him in. But his evil urge was set on these 1,000 gold coins, and he parted with them reluctantly. He even knew the exalted meaning of this evil urge. He entered the place and heard what he heard. The lesson he gave in the same period, a seal within a seal, in Likutei Moharan the first, 22, is based on the Torah teachings he heard in that place, although it is only a tiny portion. The Rebbe then gave a lesson on the words, "God said, 'T have forgiven according to your words.'" Numbers chapter 14, verse 20. The initial letters of the verse Vayomer, YHVH Salakti Kidvareka, spell out the word Kosi, my cup. See Likutei Moharan 177. I myself had just finished saying Kaddish for my mother, who had died a year before. The Rebbe included in the discourse the words from the Kaddish, "May his great name be exalted and sanctified." The great joy there is impossible to describe. Happy are those who saw it. Chochien Shabbos Faga had drunk a little wine, as is customary in celebrating a forthcoming wedding. The Rebbe was very joyous and danced practically the whole day. Then he supported himself on Reb Yudel and danced. At that point they were singing a very beautiful and inspiring melody, the mood of which was one of awe. The Rebbe danced to this melody. Usually when he danced, it was to a melody in the same mood of inspiration and awe. The Rebbe then said that this melody is one of calling and summoning. This niggun is used to call everyone to gather for the wedding. They were calling all the souls of the dead and of the saintly tzaddikim of his family, the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe's grandfather Rabbi Nachman Horadenker, and the Rebbe's mother, to come and attend the wedding. The Rebbe then prayed the afternoon service with us in the same place as we had eaten the morning meal, which was in the study hall. The Rebbe prayed, as I have said, with a scarf around B'shiash waist. Afterwards the Rebbe sat with us for the third meal and started to sing B'nei Hechala. The mood was one of joy. The Rebbe then said, "One who knows how to drink can atone for sins," and it was then that he gave the lesson mentioned above, Likutei Moharan 1177. Later on in the evening, the Rebbe prided himself that he had not yet made use of the merit of the fathers. As to what happened in Eretz Yisrael, that was, on the contrary, for their benefit. 15 Tishri, 15118. In the year 5567, 1807, the Rebbe traveled to Novorossiysk, Ostrog, Zaslov, Dubno, and some other communities, and he also visited Brody. This journey took him about half a year, and there is no one who knows what he did on this journey. He did not accept any money from anyone on this journey, and in most of the places he visited they did not know who he was at all. This was especially true in Brody, where he entered in great secrecy. It was during this journey that his wife passed away in Zaslov, where she had gone for medical treatment. We were there for the festival of Shavuot. After the death of his wife, during the summer, the Rebbe became engaged to be married again. It was then that he contracted tuberculosis. As soon as he started coughing, he predicted that this sickness would take his life. In the month of Elul, he married his second wife. 119. Immediately after Rosh Hashanah, 5568, 1807, the Rebbe traveled to Lemberg, see below number 64 to 81, where he stayed until the middle of the following summer. He returned home in time for Shabbat, Torah reading Balak. He traveled to Lemberg by way of Wolochisk. There he wanted to cross the border, but he could not cross, and he was delayed there for over 2 weeks. One night he had a dream that large numbers of soldiers of the Russian Tsar were standing there, and opposite them were large numbers of soldiers of the Austro-Hungarian Emperor. The Tsar and the Emperor were there in person. The Rebbe asked one of the officials to permit him to cross. He replied, "You? One certainly won't allow you to cross into our country." It would appear that he told him he was afraid the Rebbe would throw the country into confusion. The Rebbe then went and asked the Emperor personally. He replied, "I am not afraid. I give him permission to cross over there." When the Rebbe woke up in the morning, he told the dream to the man who was with him, and said to him, "I know that today I shall cross the border." As it turned out, the Rebbe did cross the border that day. There were other aspects to this dream, but they were mostly forgotten because they were not written down at the time. 16 Tishri, 120. In the year 5570, 1810, the Rebbe went to Uman, and there he died in 5571, October 16, 1810. See below number 82 to 126. There were many incidents connected with each of his journeys and all the places he lived in. Some of them have been recorded elsewhere, but most of them have been forgotten. In addition, there were many more incidents that we do not know about at all, for there is no one in the world who knows the ultimate purpose of the Rebbe's holy journeys. See below #50 to 52, 121. In the year 5565, 1805, between Pesach and Shavuot, the Rebbe traveled to Shirograd, Yemi Moharnat 6, and stayed there for 2 weeks. This journey, too, was very mysterious. Less than while in Shirograd, he said to his attendant, "The world longs for a leader of the Baal Shem Tov's caliber, but even if they had one, they would look for someone better, greater than." All of a sudden, the Rebbe left Shirograd and said he was fleeing like he would flee from a fire. Afterwards, there were several big fires there on a number of occasions. Rabbi Nachman said, "If only the people of Shirograd knew the favor I did for them. Even so, at least this is better than rotting. God forbid." The inference of his remark is that through his staying there, he had saved them from rot and decay. God forbid. These are the journeys of the Jewish people. Numbers chapter 33, verse 1, Likutei Moharan 1:40, Ibid 2:62. Happy is he who is worthy of knowing one single secret about his mysterious journeys. It is impossible to explain them in any simple way. At the time of his journey to Novorossiysk, he said, "If people knew the meaning of my journey, they would kiss my footprints. With every single step of my journey, I turn the scale of judgment of the entire world to the side of merit." 17 Tishri 19, 122. In the summer of 5562, 1802, before he left Zlatopolia for Breslov, the Rebbe was in Berdichev together with his father, the sainted Chassid Rabbi Simcha, of blessed memory. This was at the time when the opposition stirred up by the Shpola Zayda was in full force. In the course of the controversy, the Shpola Zayda had said he would bring letters from all the well-known tzaddikim, all of whom were opposed to Rabbi Nachman. In fact, the complete opposite happened. Letters arrived for Rabbi Nachman from all the well-known tzaddikim, all of whom gave him their support with great affection and wrote bitterly against the Shpola Zayda. Letters came from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, Rabbi Gedaliah of Linitz, the Rebbe's uncle, Rabbi Baruch, Rabbi Zev Wolf of Charny Ostrov, Rabbi Avraham Kalisker, and the Rebbe's in-laws, Rabbi Libush of Wolochisk, and Rabbi Avraham Dov of Khmelnik. All of these tzaddikim wrote letters showing great respect and deep love for the Rebbe and contempt for the Shpola Zayda. For his part, however, the Shpola Zeta paid no attention to them but pressed on with his gratuitous opposition. 18 Tishri. That summer, the Rebbe went to Berdichov, where there was a gathering of a number of leading figures, because the Rebbe's in-law, Rabbi Leibush of Wolochisk, was making a wedding for his son. Quite a number of leading figures held a meeting there. I know who some of them were. Rabbi Leibush of Wolochisk, his son Rabbi Yosef Yoske, the leading rabbi of Yasi, Rabbi Zev of Karni Ostrov, Rabbi Moshe of Krasnoy, the son of Rabbi Chaim of Krasnoy, Rabbi Yitzchak of New Constantine, and several others. They all met together in Berdichov to excommunicate the Shpola Zeta with Nidduy and Cherem, the most serious forms of rabbinic protest and sanction, for showing contempt for a true Torah scholar, namely the Rebbe. It had already been decided to proceed with the excommunication with the full agreement of all of them. But one individual from Berdichov upset the whole thing by going to speak to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichov. He was able to persuade him that it was not proper that such a thing should be done in Berdichov. Because of this, the idea was thwarted. At the time the Rebbe was staying with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who treated him with great honor, friendship, and affection. He supported the Rebbe from beginning to end. However, he was unwilling that the excommunication should be carried out in his town, having been persuaded by a number of people. This is why the plan was thwarted. Hafehai hitanthamai. Afterwards, when the Rebbe left Berdichov, he went to Tolshin, where he had a meeting with people from Breslov. They invited him there, with the agreement of the Rav, the holy Rabbi Baruch, and the Rebbe came to Breslov midway through Elul, 19 Tishri 20, 123. Before his journey to Berdichov, the Rebbe assembled a minyan of 10 men and argued in their presence with the evil one. I am not entirely clear about the details of this incident, but the Rebbe said that from that time on, in whatever he himself wanted to accomplish, the evil one gave himself free rein to travel the length and breadth of the universe to ruin it. This is why it is very difficult to carry out the Rebbe's advice and instructions. Nevertheless, the Rebbe said, God was his help. Anyone who has been worthy of becoming a follower of the Rebbe can see something of this. Throughout his life, the Rebbe never had even a moment's peace. He was constantly fighting the war of God every single moment. For I am the elder of the side of holiness, he said. But I would like to ask you about a number of things you've said, continued the Shpola Zeta. See above number 11. Is it not true that you claim there is another Zlatopolia, the Zeta's hometown in heaven? The Rebbe answered emphatically, Why? This is precisely what our sages teach. Great cities and fortresses in heaven. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 28. Just as there are cities down below, so there are cities above. Cf. Tanit 5a. Then tell me this, insisted the Zeta. Did you not say that when you were in Zlatopolia you were rectifying the sin of Jeroboam the son of Nebat? Yes, the Rebbe replied, and then related his teaching about remedying the sin of idol worship, atoning for the Jews, having exclaimed, These are your gods, O Israel, Exodus chapter 32, verse 4, by fulfilling, These are the journeys of the Jewish people, Numbers chapter 33, verse 1. Finally, the Shpola Zeta insisted, Is it true that you claim that you have been in the palace of Mashiach? And what about it? Perhaps you were there and did not find me, countered Rabbi Nachman. But since you are already asking, he continued, if you come to my house and join me in a cup of tea or coffee, and publicly announce that you retract what you said about me and regret the conflict it caused, I will explain the matter and its deeper meaning. To this, the Shpola Zeta said that he would first have to go home, and then come to the Rebbe later on. As the Zeta departed, the Rebbe heard him say to himself, And how would I look in the eyes of my wealthy supporters if I were to make peace with him? 20 Tishrei. Rabbi Nachman concluded by saying, If he had listened to me and come to my house, there might have been peace between us, but now he will certainly not make peace with me. He will carry on with the conflict. Still, be this as it may, I am not at all afraid of him. He's already shown me that he has no teeth. This ties in with what the Rebbe told in the story of the spider and the fly, Rabbi Nachman's Stories number 7, about the enemies of the mountain whose teeth fell out when they unsuccessfully tried to ascend the mountain. On his last Rosh Hashanah in 5571, 1810, when delivering the lesson, Sound the Shofar Reproof, Likuti Moharan 2:8, the Rebbe coughed up a great deal of blood. See below number 116. Afterwards he said, I have such an enemy. His burning anger against me can be cooled only when he sees my blood. Reb Noson adds, but he did not say who this enemy was. Greater than. 21, 124. On Shabbat Chanukah 5569, winter 1808, after his return from Limburg, the Rebbe had come back from Limburg the previous summer. The Rebbe gave the lesson, "The days of Chanukah are days of thanksgiving," in Likutei Moharan 2:2. He then told those at the table to sing Psalm chapter 124, a song of ascents, of David, "Had not the Lord been for us, let Israel now say." They sang this psalm over and over again that Friday night at the table. There was another occasion also, when the Rebbe was staying in Medvedevka, that he sang this psalm several times. Afterwards he turned to everyone and said, "As yet you can still not be considered my followers. There will come a time when the entire world will stand up against me and oppose me. Whoever supports me then and stays with me, he will be considered as one of my true supporters. We have no one to lean upon except our Father in heaven," Soda 49a. "For many have risen against him and against us. Had not the Lord been for us," single quote. 22, 125. I heard from someone else that the Rebbe had said that when he was in Berdichov in the summer of 5562, 1802, he had finally understood the entire significance and character of the Shpola Zeta. Until that time he had not said a word about him, because he had decided that he did not want to mention anything about him until he understood his entire significance and character. Only then did he begin to speak about him a little at very rare intervals. See below number 43, 21 Tishri 23, 126. It was our custom to be with him for Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat Chanukah, and the festival of Shavuot each year. On these three occasions we were always with him from the time he settled in Breslov. He himself gave us instructions that we should come for these three occasions, and he was quite particular about it. He would always deliver very outstanding lessons at great length. On Rosh Hashanah he would give his lesson in the late afternoon of the first day, and he would go on long into the evening of the second day of Rosh Hashanah. On Shabbat Chanukah he would give a discourse at the third meal. On Shavuot he would give it as on Rosh Hashanah, starting in the late afternoon of the first day and carrying on well into the evening of the second day. The Rebbe was extremely insistent that we should come to him for Rosh Hashanah. He said that on Rosh Hashanah he wanted all his followers to be with him as one man. No one was to be absent. The strength of his insistence that we should be with him for Rosh Hashanah is impossible to imagine. He repeated his warning several times, and he said that his whole mission is Rosh Hashanah. On the last Rosh Hashanah in Uman, he also spoke to us about this, and how great a privilege it was to be with him for Rosh Hashanah. He said, "What can I tell you? There is nothing greater than this." See below number 117. The Rebbe said, "It may be that, among the other tzaddikim, it is not considered so much of an obligation to be with them on Rosh Hashanah in particular. In that case, it will just give people another question about me." In other words, he was unwilling to give any answer or explain the reason, except to say that quite apart from this, there were plenty of other questions about him. It would simply be yet another question as to why he should be so much more particular about his followers being with him for Rosh Hashanah than all the other tzaddikim. People did go to all the tzaddikim for Rosh Hashanah, but there was not a single one who was as insistent about the matter as he was. Elsewhere it will be explained that the Rebbe told us to issue a public announcement about this. See below number 403. The Rebbe then said that whoever was worthy of being with him for Rosh Hashanah should be very happy indeed. Go your way and eat delicacies. Cf. Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 10. 22 Tishrei. There were 3 other set times in the year when the Rebbe regularly gave a lesson. Each winter he would travel once to Cheren and once to Terchovitza. On these occasions he would give his lesson at the third Shabbat meal. These visits were on Shabbat Shira and one other Shabbat. The Rebbe also used to travel there during the summer, but he would give only one discourse. This would be in Cheren on Shabbat Nachamu. Thus there were 3 fixed occasions at home and 3 elsewhere that he would give regular Torah discourses. Aside from these occasions, he had no other fixed time for delivering discourses. He never used to join us for the third Shabbat meal at all, except for the Shabbatot I have mentioned. The rest of the year he would always make the third meal alone in his room, Medubikaim. Nevertheless, we did hear many lessons from him throughout the year, only it was never at a fixed time. Any moment at all could become an opportunity for God to make us worthy of hearing the most extraordinary lessons from his lips. Sometimes it might be a Friday night or a Shabbat morning, or after the departure of the Shabbat after Havdalah. Other times it would be during the week. Many times it happened that, following on from his conversations with us about worldly matters, current developments, and so on, for he used to talk to us about these things a great deal, and we for our part would say whatever came to our lips, we would hear from him many Torah teachings, and the teachings were linked with everything we had been talking about. This happened quite regularly. Finally, we began to see with our own eyes that everything he said was entirely Torah, even his everyday conversations. Whenever we paid careful attention to what he was saying, we would see that his every word contained extraordinary teachings. In the end, we started writing down quite a few of his conversations, but less than a tiny fraction was recorded. Happy the time, happy the hour, happy the moment that we were worthy of standing before him and hearing his words. Would that we could have 1 hour like that now. We would roll through the mud for thousands of miles to be worthy of coming before him to hear words from his holy lips, for they were exalted above all holiness. 23 Tishri 24, 127. Once he was on his way to Medvedevka when he was held up and could not reach the town in time for Shabbat. He was forced to spend Shabbat in the village of Chalavkievka, not far from Medvedevka. The reason was that the horses were exhausted and unable to continue. The Rebbe was so late that he arrived in Chalavkievka only a short while before the time for lighting candles. Afterwards, when he came back to Breslov, he told us the whole story at great length. He said that, as the horses were going along close to sunset, he wanted them to go at a very fast gallop. The horses did not want to carry on, however. The Rebbe compared it to the familiar dream experience of trying to escape and not being able to. The dreamer is convinced he has to get away, but he simply cannot move. This is how it was for the Rebbe then. He was extremely worried in case he would come to break the Shabbat, God forbid. Traveling along, he felt like someone being led down to hell. At that moment, the horror is endless. This was the degree of fear he had of being involved in a situation where there was even the faintest suspicion of infringing the laws of Shabbat. From the way he spoke, I had a glimmer of understanding of the terrible horror a person would feel as he was being led down to hell. God forbid. It is impossible to describe this in writing. The Rebbe repeated himself twice over in order to emphasize the awesome and terrible horror that falls upon a person as he is being taken to hell. This was literally the fear the Rebbe had in his anxiety not to come to infringe the Shabbat, God forbid, Mekavatada. This incident took place in winter time, just before Shabbat Shira. The Rebbe's delay was not something of minor importance. Quite the contrary. The purpose of his journey was to spend Shabbat Shira in Medvedevka. His supporters from various different towns were already assembled there. He was due to give a major Torah lesson, and to perform the various tikkunim he had to accomplish, and do the work he had to do with his followers, and through his Torah teachings. The Rebbe said that whenever he was due to give a Torah lesson at a gathering of his followers, he literally felt the same fear and turmoil that all Jews feel on the eve of Yom Kippur towards evening. This same feeling would descend on him when he had to teach Torah publicly on Shabbat or on a festival. 24 Tishrei. This was his state of mind then, as he traveled to Medvedevka for Shabbat Shira, just as he had done regularly for several years now. All of a sudden he was held up and had to spend Shabbat in a village, together with those of his followers who had traveled with him and the few people who had come out to meet him. They were all forced to spend the Shabbat in Chalavkievka. They had brought nothing to eat or drink. They were forced to eat shallot made of corn and make kiddush over the bread, because they did not have a cup of wine for kiddush. They had no knives or other eating utensils. The Rebbe later described their entire Shabbat stage by stage and at great length. After Shabbat he traveled on to Medvedevka. Monday was Tu B'Shavat. They made a festive meal, and the Rebbe sat there with his followers and delivered the lesson he was due to have given them on Shabbat. Happy is he who is worthy of understanding a single thing of what happened to the Rebbe. In everything that happened to him, the most awesome and mysterious secrets were involved. 25, 128. After the Rebbe's return from Lemberg, he no longer traveled about in the Ukraine to teach as he did formerly. Once on Shabbat Shabbat, he was talking about how, in earlier times, he would go traveling at this time of the year and give wonderful Torah lessons. He spoke with a feeling of nostalgia and emotion. He spoke of how sitting in the coach on the journey was something all by itself. Then, when he arrived at the edge of the town he was traveling to, and the people would come out to meet him and pay their respects, that was something different. When he went into the town, that was something else. When he gave his discourse there, that was something different again. When he was given money, that was something else again. The Rebbe listed a number of different aspects of each trip, and said how each one was something separate all by itself. The inference is that in every single detail of each journey, there was an awesome and mystical task that he had to fulfill. See Likutei Moharan 2:38.